Welcome to the Tomorrow Today Podcast, Mapping the Future of Business, a podcast where we explore some of the key questions, trends, and insights shaping the future of business. I'm Buhle Dlamini.
And I'm Graham Codrington, and in this episode, we're looking at why the skills that can get you to C-suite leadership are not good enough to ensure that you lead your organization successfully in a world that's changing as much as it is in the 2020s.
Yogi Berra once said, "The future ain't what it used to be." And one of the biggest tasks of leadership is really to chart the path to the future of the organizations that we lead. And to do that successfully, we rely on the experiences and lessons from our past. But unfortunately, that is not going to be good enough to help us navigate the future in a very fast-changing world. Am I right, Graham?
Absolutely, Buhle. I think that those changes that we see around us every day are actually signs of an era shift in history that's going to change the rules for success and failure everywhere. And leaders are going to need an urgent upgrade of their operating systems to make the most of it. That's what this podcast is about.
We've started the Tomorrow Today podcast because we want to provide leaders with resources and a roadmap to navigate the rest of the 2020s and beyond. And when you think about the 2020s, I think it's fair to say that we are finding ourselves in a decade of disruption. And so as a result, we need a series of firmware upgrades as leaders. Not just inspiring stories or a few new ideas here and there or some improved skills. Rather, it is about getting that ability to rethink, to unlearn our industries, our businesses, and our leadership approaches. It's almost like we need that complete rehaul of the way that we do things. So as you can see, we need a new language to define our focus. And so new terms such as bionic, anti-fragile, peak performance, CQ or cultural intelligence are some of the words that are going to become part of our language as leaders going forward. And we'll get to these concepts and more over the next few episodes. But for now, Graham, as we start this first episode, probably the biggest leadership mindset shift we should start with is an understanding of this era shift moment you mentioned earlier. What did you mean by that?
Well, Buhle, I really think that if we look around us, we'll see that the systems that we grew up with don't seem to be working. I think there's actually evidence everywhere. So if you look at politics, for example, we're recording this in 2024, and there are, nearly 70 countries having elections this year, and each of those elections, whether it's the US or India or South Africa or the UK, they all feel like they're quite consequential elections. They're elections that are going to cause those countries to make big changes that could have lasting impact. And yet, most of the voters in most of those countries, I think if they had the option to choose none of the above, I think that would be their choice. If we look at economics, I think we're seeing a similar evidence of an era shift, that we've got whether it's capitalism or communism or anywhere in between, I think that we've got examples everywhere of the fact that the system is not delivering. And I think it's for the same reason everywhere. The rich people are all fine, but the middle class and poorer people are really, really struggling. And younger people coming into the workplace are saying, I don't want to play this game anymore. And then the older people are saying, well, today's young people are lazy. And anyway, we're going to get to a lot of these topics during the course of the next few episodes. I think if we look at the natural environment around us, it's under stress and strain, and the climate is fighting back, it feels like. And then, Buhle, we could look at everything. Society, religion, culture, wherever you want to look, there are lots of problems. Then there are culture wars, as we are polarized in our views, and we've got left versus right and old versus young, conservative versus progressive. And there are very few good and satisfying answers, at least yet. And I think part of our goal with this podcast is that we think we might be able to show a roadmap towards some answers.
That's a lot there, Graham, packed in that statement that you just shared with us. But I think let's take a step back. when we talk about Tomorrow Today, we've been involved with Tomorrow Today for a long time now. Actually, as a matter of fact, you and I have been working together. I think it was 2004 when I first joined Tomorrow Today and started working with you. So we've been at this for over 2 decades. When we talk about Tomorrow Today, we call ourselves futurists. And some people think that means that we try to predict the future. And I know you've had all kinds of questions, people coming to you and say, okay, what's going to happen next year and stuff like that, which is not what we are about at all. What actually is interesting is that these days, it feels like the future has already arrived. I mean, more and more with the things that are happening all around us, with what we're experiencing and what we're seeing. And the most disruptive forces that any of our clients are going to deal with in the next few years are probably well known to them already. But the problem is not that they don't know the disruptive forces. The problem is that most of our clients and most of business leaders out there are not doing anything about them. And this is what we try and help them with. The biggest challenge is that often some leaders are only seeing these as just vague threats rather than massive opportunities. What do you think about that, and what should leaders be thinking about, and in terms of some of the context we're finding ourselves right now?
Butle, I think you've summed it up really nicely. 15, 20 years ago, most of our job and most of what people asked us to come and do for their companies was come and give us your views of the future. And we had lots of presentations with lists of future trends. These days, though, those trends are unknown. I think people know what's coming in terms of future technologies and shifts in the world around them. So we've shifted away from trying to predict specific trends to saying to people, where are the opportunities available to you in deep disruptive change? And so we call these actually the great grey elephants. In English, we have this phrase, there's an elephant in the room. And what we mean by that is there's this massive big thing sitting in the corner, but nobody wants to talk about it. And it's a highly probable, high impact force that even though it is huge, or maybe even because it is so big, it's often ignored or underestimated, certainly from an opportunities perspective. You can see it, but you're not really discussing it. The grey elephants that we think need to be talked about, and again, we're going to get to this in future episodes of the podcast, are an aging population, the fact that people are living longer than they expected to, an angry planet, that's the climate, that's really and natural resources that are causing chaos actually at the moment, inequality, this distance between the rich and the poor, that's causing, the fourth item is big squeezes. Inflation is back. You've got the squeeze of supply chain. You've got the squeeze of labor unions against their employers. Lots of squeezes in the economy and the world around us, which leads to the fifth point, angry people. And maybe some people saying, yeah, people have always been angry. And yes, but what are you doing about it? And what's the opportunity that angry people bring? So maybe you people can understand why we look at this through a slightly different lens than most people do. The sixth idea is what we call multipolarity. And that's got to do with what I was talking about a moment ago, this era shift in political and economic power in the world. And then finally, the seventh of the grey elephants is one people might say, yeah, we know it's coming, it's technology, but we use the label intelligent advances to talk about the last thing, because, well, we actually think this is one of the biggest ones that people think they are thinking about. But yeah, Butle, intelligent advances, I know you think about this a lot.
Absolutely. That last one is probably the most powerful one for us to be thinking about right now and for leaders to be thinking about. Because as you say, when we talk about intelligence advances, really the big part of that is about technology. And so we think that business and the future of business is bionic. And so this is what you're going to be hearing us talking about more and more and more. when we think about bionic, it's very easy to think about bionic limbs and to think about technology that helps humans physically to achieve more than they would on their own. That is very much part of bionic. But when we're thinking about the organizations of the future, what we believe is that the successful organizations are going to be the ones that harness the power of human capital and technology, and moving us not only to just utilizing technology in the way that helps us to do things faster and more effectively, but actually in the way that enhances human capacity and allows humans to actually achieve much, much more. So bionic is going to be something that is going to be a big topic going forward.
And Butle, a great example of what we mean by bionic is actually ChatGPT or any of the others, Claude and Bing and all the others. But if all you do is treat them like a search engine and you go in and you type a question, you'll get a very surface level response. And a lot of people go, okay, what's the hype on this? And if you then try and go a little bit further and ask a different question, it might even hallucinate an answer and give you a really bad answer. The people that are getting the most out of ChatGPT are those people who are learning how to ask a question. In fact, we call it prompt engineering because it isn't even asking a question. The more you know how to put information into a generative AI system, the better the responses that you get. And so if people are just thinking about ChatGPT as a replacement, as automation of humans, they're missing the opportunity. The threat is automation. The opportunity is augmentation, this bionic thing coming together. And so that's what we want to try and do in the Tomorrow Today podcast, is we want to help you to see what's going to change. We want to help you then put on the opportunity mindset that takes us beyond just seeing a threat or a problem, but helps us to identify what's possible in this changing context.
Yes, Graham. I hope that people will not get lost in, in all of this stuff that we're talking about. Because I think what's happening today is that there's just so much that is going on, and when you're thinking about artificial intelligence, when you're thinking about the geopolitical situation, when you think about all of the disruptive forces that we've just highlighted, it can be so easy for leaders to get overwhelmed and think, well, what can I do? And what we want this podcast to help you with is really to understand that some companies already are working these things out. And to highlight some of that, to look at how some leaders are rewriting the rules and drawing different maps for the future. I think the most important thing for leaders to take away from this conversation that we're having right now is that if the future has changed, we need to do things differently. And as Graham and I often say, the future has changed. And so now, what is it that we need to do?
There are some companies that are responding to some of these big shifts that are taking place in the world and recognizing the opportunity to do something about these big, great gray elephants. One of the stories that we really like as a team is the story of Patagonia. They're a family-owned business started by Yvon Chouinard, and a number of his family over the years have been involved in the family business. They originally started, I think, in making equipment for forestry and lumberjacks, and then they got into outerwear, and now they're obviously in both the leisure and sportswear and outdoors type equipment. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. And when Yvon reached the point of retirement, he could have just handed the business over to the family to keep running. They could have actually sold the business. I think there was a lot of interest in going public, and they got a lot of interest from private investors. But what he did instead was he gave a sizable chunk of the company to all of the employees and made it an employee-run company. And I think the family keeps a trust which has an interest in the business, and I mean, they're never going to struggle. Yvon did really well for the business. But the employees now run the business. And it is such a great story of just doing things differently. When in 2022, when they announced this, it made a massive splash all over international media and the financial pages, because it's just not what people are used to seeing. But it's propelled the company into even faster growth and even bigger impact. One of the things that Yvonne and the family have now done is also started a charity work called 1% for the Planet, where they kind of took their view of contributing to the world and making a difference in the world and doing business for good, and they turned it into a platform that other companies can use. So companies sign up and pledge to give 1% of their revenue to a charity or charities that are making a positive impact on the world.
Absolutely. And we at Tomorrow Today, our company has actually signed up for this. So we've signed up for 1% for the planet. And for us, it's not just because when you hear this 1% and you're just thinking charities, it's not just about charities, it's about sustainability. It's really about making sure that as we do business, we are doing it in a sustainable way. And what I do like about it is that it also allows us sometimes as well to be able to choose some of the causes that we can align ourselves with, where we can actually see the impact of what we're contributing to. And this really links to some of what we spoke about already, when it comes to big squeezes, where more and more people are feeling the pressures of the changes that are happening in the world. Inequality, where if we don't deal with the inequality that we're seeing in our world, it will affect our businesses down the road. It will affect the environment in which we find ourselves. And so we really believe that these are good examples of what sustainable businesses need to be doing and need to be in order to be what we refer to as business for good. And Graham, talk to us about some of the key principles that we're seeing of businesses that are responding to these forces in our world.
Yeah, so Buhle, the reason I like the Patagonia story is that it's not just a story about a company that made a lot of money and then out of the goodness of their heart, they chose to give a little bit away, and then there's a little bit of impact on the planet. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that they have built that kind of mindset into their business. So they evaluated their strategy. They looked at their organizational DNA. They've built foundations for success of the future that are built on a new way of thinking. And new business principles. And that's the shift, I think, that in this podcast we want to help leaders to understand. So it's not about doing what you've always done and then just adding a few tiny little tweaks or sort of elements onto it, but it's actually about rethinking, unlearning some of what we do with business and in leadership. So for this episode, the first episode of our podcast, maybe there are 3 principles that leaders can take away that they can immediately go and start thinking about. And the first of those principles, this is one we borrowed from Henry Ford. I think a lot of people are familiar with one of Henry Ford's favorite quotations. He was asked about what he was thinking when he was developing the Model T Ford. And he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And I think, Berkeley, for me, the Patagonia story links to that as well. If Yvonne Chouinard had asked people what they wanted, they would have just said, just give us really great outerwear for going out into nature. And he said, no, I want to try and build a whole new business. So the first principle is that in a time of disruptive change, you cannot simply focus on optimizing your existing business. If there are things you can do to build a better business, do them. But that's the easy stuff. What we need now is leaders and organizations who are prepared to do things that haven't been done before in ways that they haven't been done before. So point number 1, Don't just optimize your existing businesses. Point number 2, I can use another example from history, Nokia. Everybody knows the story. This amazing company dominates the world space. In 2007, the first company in human history to have 1 billion active customers. But by 2016, they are being sold to Microsoft for $1. And on the day they were sold, Stephen Elop, who was the CEO at the time, he said, "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." And for me, I mean, he can't be right? We didn't do anything wrong. Maybe if you go and look at the management meetings and the minutes of the board meetings and at the decisions that were made, maybe he's right. Maybe you wouldn't find a specific thing that any of them did wrong. But they clearly did something wrong, because they went from the world's largest tech company to being sold for $1 in failure in less than a decade. And I think what they did wrong is that they didn't build anti-fragility. We'll come back to that word in future episodes. It's even adaptability might be a good enough word at this stage, but they didn't build that into their DNA. So it's not just good enough for your leaders to be able to adapt to change, but you've got to have adaptability in the heart of your business, or you will lose. And Patagonia's story is a great example of that. Bosley, the third one I know is one you're passionate about. Why don't you tell us the third principle?
Well, the third principle really speaks to bionic, that business needs to be bionic. And I know there's a lot of chaos right now when it comes to generative AI and artificial intelligence. And it might cause some of the leaders out there to really want to dismiss the whole thing. And I will have to say that will be the biggest mistake that you can make. Because the way that you've got to think about the moment we're finding ourselves in now is to think back to the late 90s and the early 2000s, with the internet becoming sort of like the force that was going to change business. And at that time, many people thought, this is going to pass. This is just a phase, or it's just going to fade away. The reality is that what we are experiencing in terms of advances in technology, that means all kinds of technology, artificial intelligence being one of them, robotics, quantum computing, and so on and so forth. So when we think about all of these advances in technology, that means that organizations need to change the way that they are structured, the way that they do things. And so the way that we manage people and the way that we manage technology needs to come together in a way that makes our organizations bionic. That's a huge mindset shift that business leaders need to be doing right now. And we at Tomorrow Today, we are working towards helping leaders really figure out what this means. Because when we're talking about bionic, it's not just about automation. It's about augmentation. It's not just about competition between tech and people. It's actually about integration. And so this is really going to be one of those key principles that are going to shape the future in the 2020s and beyond. So if we wait for the gray elephant to appear, it will be too late to prepare. And so here are some of the things that we need to think about is that we need to expect the unexpected, promote resilience, protect the less fortunate, and cooperate and seek opportunities to shape the future positively. And so hopefully that now makes sense to you in terms of what we said at the beginning of the episode, that leadership needs to change. Graham?
You know, if you want to be a leader, if you are a leader already, and you want to be the leader who navigates yourself and your organization and your team through unprecedented times of change like we're dealing with at the moment, then it isn't just about tweaking your approach or adding a few new skills, but basically just getting on with it. We're going to need new maps. We're going to need different approaches. We're going to need new skills and the upgrade of all of our existing skills. And above all, I think we're going to need the ability to rethink and unlearn. And that's what we want this podcast to be. The Tomorrow Today podcast is going to be your partner in doing all of these things.
So I hope you are ready to make the start right away. We invite you to download the Grey Elephants white paper that's made available in the direct link on the show notes. The document will help you to imagine what the future might look like. In this document, you will find lots of ways to reimagine how employees, partners, supply chains, and customers will change, as well as get into testing your strategy's preparedness and refresh when necessary. So consider what your organization might do today to build a competitive advantage in tomorrow's world. In every episode, we plan to do a resource recommendation, something that leaders should be reading, and we believe that leaders should be readers and learners. So books, podcasts, videos, articles, we will be bringing it to you. So to get us started, Graham, tell us about our first one.
Thanks, Busley. And I almost hesitate to recommend this book because I really hope everybody's already read it. Because it's Adam Grant's book, Think Again. He's already written a second book, but honestly, Think Again blew me away when it came out a few years ago, and I still think it's in my top 3 books of all time. It really is a good book. The subtitle is The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And so I think people will understand why it really was one that captured my attention, because it helps us to get started with that idea of rethinking and unlearning. That's so much part of what we do at Tomorrow Today. So what Adam does in the book, and he is a psychology professor. He calls himself the psychologist of the future of work. And so he's a psychologist who's focused on what we do in the workplace and how we come to the workplace. And in this book, what he's trying to do is to show us how important it is to approach the world around us with a little bit of skepticism and approach it like a scientist, rather than a preacher or a politician or a prosecutor. Those are the labels that he uses in the book. So rather than approach the world around us by trying to prove that we are right with our confirmation bias, or trying to convince other people of how right we are and get them to see the world our way, what he does is throughout the book, it's a very practical book in which he shows you exactly what you need to do to come with the attitude of a learner, with the attitude of somebody who asks questions as a way of developing not just your insights, but also as a leadership skill to be able to influence and engage with other people. And also, of course, to make sure that we upgrade our thinking and our view of the world around us. And I agree with him completely that his view is that changing the way we thinking again, and giving ourselves and our teams permission to question, to reevaluate, to rethink, to unlearn, that will improve adaptability, responsiveness to change, innovation, and even resilience as well. So Adam Grant's book, Think Again, highly, highly recommended. And it's the sort of book, in my opinion, that you and your team should read it through together and discuss it. And I suppose we could pull this whole episode together by telling Rumi's parable. It's, I think, an even older parable than the Persian poet and philosopher Rumi. I think it originates from India, but it's probably been told in all sorts of cultures. It's about a whole lot of blind people who come across an elephant, and because the elephant is so big and all of them are blind, each of them only gets to touch and feel one part of the elephant. And the first person who touches the trunk says, well, this feels like a snake. And another person touches the ear and he says, this feels like a kind of fan or something. Somebody else touches the leg and he says, well, this feels like a tree trunk. And somebody else who touches the side of the elephant says, well, this must be a wall. And somebody who touches the tail says it's a rope. And they all argue with each other and say, no, it's a snake, it's a wall, it's a tree trunk. And they can't agree on what it was. Obviously, then the wise man comes in at the end who is awake. and has got his eyes open. And in Rumi's telling of it, the wise man is a person who brings a candle into the room and says, open your eyes. And of course, then they see that they will all correct. I think this is a great parable to link Adam Grant's ideas of, how do we see the world through different eyes and realize it's not a competition about who's right, but it's about learning. But I think it's a wonderful analogy for what we've tried to share in this episode about the elephants. It's not that we don't know that these elephants, these 7 great forces exist, but I think that often we just see it through our own eyes. We just see it the way we see it. We argue with everybody else about the way the world is according to us. And I think it's the wise person, the wise leader who brings the candle, who brings the light into the room and invites other people to take their blindfolds off and to say, look at the world in a different way, see the bigger picture and understand what it is we're actually dealing with. And then we can proceed from there. So, a nice Persian poem and a wonderful book to recommend as we think about looking at the context and seeing the world differently.
So by now you get it. We are facing unprecedented changes in the 2020s and in this decade of disruption. But we also have better technologies and insights to help identify problems and deliver solutions. So the truth is, great opportunities exist for leaders who are tuned towards change.
So maybe, Buhle, the takeaway for this first episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast is just actually a question. What do each of us need to rethink and unlearn about our own leadership style?
Well, we need the confidence to lead courageously, because the greatest risk of the 21st century is that we fail to think boldly enough to make this century great for everyone. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the future episodes of the Tomorrow Today podcast. And we'll see you in the next episode where we'll be focusing on organizational design for the future.